Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our masterclass all about how to get the most out of your Microsoft license. We're going to make a start in a couple of minutes. We're just going to give people some time to join. It is just 2 o'clock today, so I'll probably give it about a minute or so. But thank you very much for joining us. You are in the right place. Thanks. I think we'll make a start. It looks like numbers are starting to stabilize. I'm sure there'll be a couple of people who join as we carry on. But as I mentioned before, hi, everybody. Welcome to our masterclass all about how to get the most out of your Microsoft license. We're really delighted to have some great speakers here today. Just a little bit of housekeeping before coming to the speaker sessions. This webinar is being recorded. And you will receive a copy of that recording and also a copy of all of the slides used today after this session, probably later on this afternoon or potentially first thing tomorrow. There are closed captions available. If you go to the bottom of your screen, you'll be able to enable those so you can see them if you would like that throughout. All attendees are on mute and we can't see you. So that means if you do have any questions, please do use the Q&A function. It would also be great if people are active in the chat. Please feel free to introduce yourself, say hello, say where you're from, and sort of talk a little bit about how you're using Microsoft as we go through. Both myself and my colleague Steph, who is managing slides today, will be keeping an eye on the chat and making sure we're monitoring what questions we get through. So our agenda for today, first of all, we're going to see Sam Cohen from Equitech. He's going to really do a deep dive into Microsoft products from with huge amounts of experience as a Microsoft vendor. And then we're going to go to Peter Weatherly, who works for Walnut Care, which is a home care provider in Lincolnshire, to talk all about how they've been using a huge array of Microsoft products within Walnut Care and their journey within the service. We have loads and loads of time for a question and answer session at the end. So put your questions into the Q&A throughout. We'll make sure that get put to Sam and to Peter. If there's anything we don't have time for as well, we'll make sure to come back to you via email as well. And we should wrap up by about 3:30 at the very latest. For anybody who's joining on one of our masterclass sessions for the first time, just a really brief slide about who we are as Digital Care Hub. So my name's Katie Thorne. I'm the project lead for Digital Care Hub. We're a partnership project run by the Care Provider Alliance. We represent care providers of adults with physical, sensory or learning disabilities, people with mental ill health and older people, covering approximately 10,000 organisations. Our sort of core goal is to provide free support, advice and guidance around technology, data protection and cybersecurity to adult social care providers in England. And we can do this because we're funded by the Department of Health and Social Care and NHS England, and we're really, really delighted that the Digitising Social Care team in NHS Transformation Directorate have funded us to put on this masterclass for you today. So without any further ado, I'd love to pass over to Sam. Sam, great to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Katie. Yeah, it's a pleasure being here today, and thank you all very much for coming and listening. So to quickly introduce myself, my name is Sam, and my role at Equitech is focused around working and supporting organizations within the care sector. So just a little bit about Equitech. So unlike most IT companies, we work directly with Microsoft, which provides us with access to direct Microsoft resource and significant discounts around Microsoft licensing. And yeah, we've achieved this as we hold accreditations in all 6 of the technologies within Microsoft's ecosystem. Next slide, please. So I will be covering a few things that I feel are largely underutilized and provide organizations with sort of maximum return from typical budget, time, and resource constraints. And hopefully I'll show you some helpful features that you may already be paying for, but just aren't aware of. So we'll be covering 4 key topics. The first, a bit about Microsoft 365 generally. And then we'll dive into fully utilizing 3 tools in Microsoft. So the first being Teams, the second is the Power Platform, and the final one is Microsoft's AI tool called Copilot. Next slide, please. So first things first, what exactly is Microsoft 365? So in simple terms, it is a full suite of applications designed to help you and your team collaborate efficiently, and whether you're kind of in person or remote. So you got to think of it as your kind of digital toolbox for everything from email and scheduling to document writing and communication. So the core applications you are likely to use are Outlook, which is kind of the most popular email and calendar tool globally. And then you have the Office suite, which is your Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. And then moving on, we have SharePoint. So traditionally, lots of companies would store their documents on a physical server. With SharePoint, it's a secure cloud-based document solution, essentially your online filing cabinet you can access from anywhere. And then we have Teams, which is a collaboration tool where you can chat, call, and set up meetings and message colleagues and also external users. And I'll expand a bit on that later on. Finally, we have OneDrive. This is an area for your personal files and documents that you don't anticipate sharing with anybody else. Some people see this as a backup solution, which it's not. Microsoft state this in their terms and conditions, and basically you are responsible for backing up any data within the platform. And we always recommend companies use a third-party product for this service. Next slide, please. So in addition to the tools I've mentioned, there are numerous security features that can protect and secure your data to help your organization become compliant and meet regulatory standards from the Data Security and Protection Toolkit, as well as elements of the CQC's new single assessment framework. It's important to note these security tools are only available with specific licenses, such as the Business Premium license, which is for organizations under 300 users, and for E3 and E5 licenses, which are for those with over 300 employees. And again, it should be noted that these security features are not automatically enabled. So you need to set up and configure these according to your business requirements, as there's no kind of one size fits all for security configuration. However, I'd expect we have previously deployed some best practice configurations, which would be very happy to share with you. So moving on to some features and functionality included within this license, you have an enterprise level antivirus and anti-spam. This will protect you against phishing attacks, block spam, and removes the need to subscribe to any kind of third-party antivirus products. There's also a security tool called Entra ID. This allows you to join all of your company and users' devices together, making it really easy to manage all of your devices from one place. And once that's set up, you can then apply security controls like multi-factor authentication, encryption, and even set up rules like blocking access from certain countries. So let's say if we know that 80% of attacks originate from outside of the UK, if your business doesn't work outside of the UK, you can restrict kind of all countries or maybe restrict specific countries. On top of that, if you have particularly sensitive documents like financial or medical information, you can label these files and choose your own kind of bespoke security rules for them, such as maybe not being able to send or forward documents outside the organization, or not being able to attach them to non-company emails and so on. And then you've also got features like the data loss prevention. So this can monitor any unusual information that takes place. So let's say you have a staff member that tries to send a service user's medical documents outside of the organization. You can block that action, and the system can then send an alert to your IT team or your management team, so they're aware of the situation. Yeah, so those are just kind of a few of the security tools that are available to you within license. Again, I'm happy to provide more if anyone wishes. Next slide, please. Ooh, there we go. Oh, back one. There we go. Compliance. So the tools that I've shown you, if deployed correctly, will help you meet requirements of several regulatory bodies for care providers. So the Data Security and Protection Toolkit, GDPR, Data Protection Act, as well as some of the CQC's single assessment framework. And additionally, if you're a registered charity, you get 10 of these business licenses for free. And yes, for the Data Security and Protection Toolkit, there are 17 policies, which I've listed some of them on the slide, that can be implemented using that license. So definitely worth kind of getting it right. Yeah, it could be very handy. Next slide, please. Okay, so now for an overview of how to make the most out of Microsoft Teams. And for context, this is an application that provides a central location, all of your files, your documents, team collaboration, and voice communication, meaning you don't have to move between other applications. And yeah, I spend about 90% of my times in Teams. So yeah. One of the key features of Teams is the ability to create something called channels. These are dedicated spaces within your organization, typically broken down by departments or projects. For example, you might have a channel for your support workers, for your finance team, your HR team, training development, policies and company procedures. And yeah, so each of these channels is its own area for that department, where you can have focused conversations, share and access relevant documents, and even set up kind of meetings and calls, all without cluttering up the rest of your organization's communication. And yeah, by doing this and structuring your organization through channels, it can significantly improve your security and compliance posture. So Teams allows you to control who has access to that channel, ensuring that sensitive information is only seen by people who need to see it. So let's say you have confidential financial information that only the finance team should have access to. Using Teams, it makes it very easy to manage. And in addition, you can set up policies to protect sensitive files by clicking on like a sensitivity label. So people can't copy and paste, they can't download or share documents outside of your organization. And this is really important because if you need to share sensitive information with people outside of your organization, you can invite them to view the document inside of Teams, where it's still in your environment and it's still protected. So yeah, and once, I mean, this is really important because without those kind of policies in place, once you send sensitive information outside of your organization, you lose control over that data. So yeah, important to think about. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about the benefits of creating an intranet site within Teams. So this is a private website just for your department, accessible within Teams. So you can use this space to show important department announcements, share resources, or even build out like a process such as onboarding for a new employee. So for example, you may have a new support worker joining your team. And instead of giving them paperwork to read, you can direct them to the onboarding channel in Teams. And here they can find maybe an introduction video of how to use Teams and where files and documents are stored. It can show them also maybe onboarding documents they need to read, sign, and then return within a specific time frame. And that can all be monitored in Teams. There might be training videos they need to watch. And this basically, it provides a really documented and consistent onboarding process for everyone in your organization. And yes, yeah, so also with Teams, you can delegate tasks. So you can set up tasks and assign people to that specific task, as well as set a level of priority within a given deadline. So for instance, you may have a new service user that needs a care plan being set up or updated, and you can assign that task to a particular team member and set it as a high priority, and then track this task's progress within Teams. So it provides basically a simplified way to track and manage your business tasks. Next slide, please. So another feature within Teams is that you have the ability to create work shifts, rotas, and timetables. Now, I appreciate some of you might use paper timetables or other third-party softwares. However, this can all be consolidated within Teams. You can create and manage shift schedules, allowing your team to check in and check out of their shifts via a Teams app on their mobile device. You can also make changes in real time to the rota and notify your staff instantly. And in addition, there's full reporting that's available to all aspects of your work schedule. Next slide, please. So the final thing I'll add about Teams is that with the telephone network switchover that's happening in 2027, when BT turn off the traditional analog system, you can move your phone system into Teams. So this provides the ability to make and receive landline calls through Teams, putting all of your communication into one platform. So for example, if you see on the slide, the dial pad, you'll see my work number displayed at the bottom. That number was originally on a traditional analog system, and now it's been moved digitally into Teams, and I keep the same number, so it's all possible. And that allows me to basically make and receive calls from kind of my laptop or my mobile device, and eliminates the need for a separate work handset on my desk. And on top of that, you can set up automated call queues, like press 1 for accounts, press 2 for general inquiries, just as you would with a traditional system. But important to keep in mind that Teams Voice is an add-on license. So you'd need a license for the dial pad feature, as you can see on the slide, and another one for the calling plan. But in terms of pricing, I think it's very reasonable, particularly for those with charitable status. Next slide, please. Okay, so now you know how to fully utilize Teams, how to organize, structure, and secure all your data. So now let's say you want to gain insights and visualize that information to improve your care services. So for this, you would use the Power Platform. Now, the Power Platform is where you can create apps at low cost to automate processes and analyze your data to get the most return from the information you already hold. There are 4 tools within this platform to help you do this. You have the Power Apps, where you can create an app where staff can easily input and access service user information on their device and make sure that everyone has kind of up-to-date information. You have Power Automate. You can use this to set up automated reminders for repositioning schedules, for example. You have Power BI, just short for Power Business Intelligence. This generates reports and visualizes trends in your data, so you can show service users' health, staff performance, incident and accident reports, and so on. And finally, you have what's called Power Virtual Agents, where you can build a chatbot to answer frequently asked questions from service users, from their families, or your staff. So, for example, what time your visiting hours are. Next slide, please. Okay, so how can you use the Power Platform as a care provider? So at the moment, some of you may use a visitor's book at reception, for example, for visitors signing in and signing out. If that book is lost, you lose that information, you lose that data. Instead, you could use the Power Platform to create an app that sits on a tablet at reception where people could sign in and sign out. Now, by doing this, that information, that data, it's captured, it's backed up, and it's secure. And that data can also be used to gain insights and be searched easily. And with Power Automate, you can then, for example, set up an automated process that sends a feedback form to a visitor when they sign out and leave your site. So this helps gather visitors' experiences and can be really valuable to showing staff positive feedback, as well as identifying areas of your service that might need addressing. Additionally, this can serve as evidence for the CQC's single assessment framework, where in inspections, you can basically show you're actively listening to and addressing employees, service users, and visitors' experiences to improve your care. So this is covered in Regulation 16 and 17 of the Single Assessment Framework, which expresses the need for care providers to address the ability to assess the quality of experience for service users and staff, and also for receiving complaints. You can create apps kind of for all sorts of different activities quickly and affordably, from kind of cleaning rotas, repositioning schedules, email, employee annual leave, and so on. And yeah, and then just to be clear, depending on the level of complexity, basic Power Apps can be created using kind of simple drag and drop. But for more elaborate apps, it will require a level of coding knowledge. And if everyone doesn't feel confident with that, then I'm happy to guide you through that process. Next slide, please. So lastly, in the Power Platform, I will speak about Power BI. So this is a tool that makes sense of all of your data. It analyzes the data you collect across different platforms, whether it's in an Excel spreadsheet, a CRM, a third-party software. And it can show you trends and visualize information, making it easier to understand and ultimately help improve your service. So here in the slide, you can see we're capturing all the information in an emergency room, such as total visits, average waiting times, who's visiting by demographic, what time of day. And this can capture all types of data. So whether it's financial, it's HR related, or accident and incident. So for example, I've thought of, imagine you're trying to track falls among service users. So each time a fall occurs, a staff member could log the details using a form in Power Apps. So who's fallen, when it happened, maybe where it happened. And Power BI can take that data and turn it into very easy to read charts and graphs. So for example, you might notice that most falls are happening maybe after dinner in a particular part of the building. And with those insights, you can then investigate why this is happening and then take steps to reduce it. So maybe you could add more staff to that area at that time, or you might realize, the lighting needs improving. So you can address it like that. So yeah, Power BI, it really enables you to kind of analyze your data and provides you with insights that maybe you typically didn't have. And we found a lot of companies using this tool, particularly to consolidate data across maybe multiple sites. And again, if you're a registered charity, you can get 10 of these licenses for free. So again, it's a free resource. I would highly recommend it. Next slide, please. So finally, the final tool I'll speak about is probably the most spoken about at the moment. It's Microsoft's AI tool called Copilot. This is a really powerful tool that can accelerate many of your business processes and make your work kind of easier and faster. It can help you by automating routine tasks and generally acting as a personal assistant in kind of all areas. So from writing reports, care plans, doing emails, meeting minutes, staff scheduling, finances, so on. It's very powerful. And in terms of writing, it can even start learning your writing style. So it continually gets better the more you use it, which I've found myself when using it, which is pretty wild. Yeah, but important to note, a really big challenge that many face is that they haven't taken the first steps, which we've kind of covered earlier, like taking the time to properly classify and secure your data and put access controls in place. because Copilot it's an automated tool which basically has access to your entire company environment, all of your information. So if you don't carefully set up and validate your access controls, it can unintentionally expose really sensitive data. So, for example, if you haven't put controls on financial data, any employee could then go and ask Copilot for the payroll of your information. So obviously there's a lot to think about before deploying and buying Copilot. But once you've secured everything, you can really start using Copilot and your data to speed up your processes and ultimately focus more of your time on caring and supporting service users. Next slide, please. So how can you, as a care provider, benefit from Copilot? So let's say you're in maybe a multicultural, multilingual care environment where residents and their families might not all speak English as their first language. Copilot can automatically translate documents, consent forms, care plans, and conversations into 70 different languages. So this could help ensure that residents and their families fully understand the care being provided, and also builds trust so that everyone is on the same page. On top of that, for residents with hearing impairments who can sometimes maybe miss out on information during conversations or meetings, Copilot has a feature called speech to text, which converts spoken words into text in real time. So that means that during meetings or even casual conversations, that spoken words can be displayed as text on a tablet, on a screen, basically ensuring that residents can follow along and participate to a far greater extent. One final example I've thought of that I haven't actually added to the slides is that Copilot would be very helpful in the process of a CQC inspection. So as a CQC might come and ask for a list of documents and policies they wish to see. Now looking for those documents and evidence within the kind of tight time window that the CQC provide, it's very stressful. Using Copilot, you can actually use it as kind of your own personal search engine that can grab all of your evidence and your documentation, as it can search through all of your emails, your applications, essentially your entire environment. And only one person would need a Copilot license. So that would be kind of, in terms of maximizing return on investment, I think for management, that would be very, very helpful. Next slide, please. So I have got a link here for Microsoft Support, which is a brilliant resource for those who want step-by-step guidance. So here I've searched for how to do sensitivity labeling. And there's a whole page and it shows you exactly what to do. And you can do the same for setting up, anything, multi-factor authentication, using Power Apps, and so on. So yeah, would highly, highly recommend. Next slide, please. I think, yeah, so that is everything I'll be covering today. And hopefully that's helped kind of get you an understanding of what's available to you. And yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions.
That's great. Thank you, Sam. Really, really helpful information. We had quite a few questions which have come through. So if it's right, I might just pop some of them to you now while they're
Sure.
sort of live in people's minds. So first one was, is it possible to password protect access to Teams if you're using it on your phone?
To password protect,
Mm-hmm.
there are password policies that you can put in place, I do believe. I gotta say, I might actually have to double check with that. But there's multi-factor authentication that you can have for it, so you can put password protection in.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. And then I guess a follow-up one to about Teams as well then is, so are the chats encrypted or protected in Teams in any way?
You can deploy encryption, yes. But that's, yeah, again, that needs to be enabled yourself. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. And then we had quite a lot of questions which are coming through sort of about licensing and how the costs of that work. My sort of working assumption has been that it depends on your organization size and how many users you have. But is there sort of any sort of general rules of thumb about this is what you get as a core products as a business license? And then I know Copilot is an add-on, but which the other ones are add-ons?
Yes, so for the business premium license, so for organizations under 300 employees, that is if you are a charity, we can provide them for £4.20
Mhm.
after those 10 first free licenses. And if you are not a charity, you can get them for £17 per license. And then for e-licenses, I'm going to have to double check with you. I'm going to be honest.
It's all right.
Off the top of my head, I've forgotten. And then for Copilot, I believe it's £20 per user. Unfortunately, Copilot, there is not a discount for charities, which is something we are trying to speak to Microsoft about.
Mhm.
And yes, what was I? Sorry, I forgot what the other question was.
Oh, and then also, this has just come through, but it's sort of related, but does Power BI, is that at an additional cost as well?
Power BI is an additional cost. So you get 10 free licenses if you're a charity.
Mhm.
And off the top of my head, oh, hang on, I've just got a little. Here we go. My colleague's just gone and helped me for the E3 license, it's £31 per user per month. And yes, Power BI, off the top of my head, I'm gonna have to come back to you. I think if we I can come back to you with that one. I'm off the top of my head. I'm sorry, I can't
That's okay. I
quite
don't
remember.
need you to remember all of Microsoft pricing structure off the top of your head. And I'm sure people are still asking some questions in the chat. So if you get a chance. Also, there's a lot of people from lots of different organizations who have joined us today. So it might be easier if people sort of contact you and your organization and then can have a chat through what's most appropriate, if that's helpful for them. And just a lot of people in chat saying, are those prices monthly? And yes, they were per month.
Yes, they're monthly.
Right. Okay. I'm sure there's lots more questions which are coming through and we will come back to you. But first, I just want to pass over to Peter. He's also going to talk about how they've been using all of the Microsoft products. And then we'll kind of come back to any additional questions at the end, if that's right with you both. Peter, over to you then.
Right, thank you, Katie. Hello, everybody. Just give me 2 seconds to get the presentation up on screen here, and we will be good to go. So just bear with me for 2 seconds while I clear things out of the way. 1, 2, and 3. There we go. Okay, so give me a second when this comes up, and hopefully you can see this. That coming up okay?
You can see that. Perfect.
Fantastic. Right, okay. So yes, my name is Peter Weatherly, and I'm the project manager here at Walnut Care. Now, we are a domiciliary care provider in Lincolnshire, and today I'm going to take you through some of our experiences with the Microsoft 365 platform. So I'm second generation in our family business. My parents have been doing this for 20 odd years now, and my involvement started about 10 years ago now, just over. This was never meant to be my game plan in terms of how I was going to make my living. Originally, I trained as a professional musician, a classical singer, in fact, but I turned my hand to development during COVID, partly because, well, let's be honest, we singers were all told we were public enemy number 1, 2, and 3, but also out of a need to adapt to the very rapidly changing situation in which we all found ourselves during that time. Now, at a very basic level, our first SharePoint site was born out of a need to keep staff in touch with the central operations. So it wasn't exactly coding at that point yet, but it gave me this first insight into just what Microsoft could do. Having been brought up on Office and that sort of thing, as Sam was describing earlier, we never really considered it as being particularly useful until that point, until, as I say, circumstances forced our hand. 4 years on, this is now a very much full-time role for me, and then some. I handle quite a few of the day-to-day operational areas in our business that Microsoft 365 now touches on, while also building bespoke applications for ourselves and our use cases. So let's just say I've had my share of sleepless nights, but hopefully some of this session will save you some of that pain should you choose to go down a similar route. So what are we going to cover? This session is intended to be a fairly brief overview of how we at Walnut Care use the advanced applications within Microsoft 365, what you can do with them, and some good practices around their use. I am also going to discuss the place of digital tools in what is still a very offline and analog sector. You're likely not going to be able to commit everything to going digital just yet, but hopefully you will be able to get started on that pathway if you haven't done so already. Now, to be honest, this is also not going to be a how-to manual as to how to use this platform. Let's be honest, Sam's done all that for us. And there is extensive documentation available, published by Microsoft and others. All I would advise on that front is don't be too daunted by some of the language. It can get quite technical, but also don't then think and make the mistake of charging into some of this stuff blindly and having to go through several slices of humble pie afterwards. Ultimately, my aim is to leave you with an open mind as to the possibilities of this platform and the opportunities it might provide for you and for your business. So I think let's start with an obvious question. Why Microsoft? There's a whole plethora of tools out there. Zapier comes to mind, OpenAI's tools. Some of them have started to come to fruition now, but let's be honest, it's market dominance, isn't it? Those of you who were around at the time will know that in times past, they weren't exactly a byword for their business practices, but we are where we are. And the benefit of all of that time and experience is that Microsoft does have unparalleled integration, both in terms of hardware and the software. And not only that, everybody is familiar with at least the basics of Microsoft, be it the Office suite, Windows Phone, if you ever have one of those. And that reduces the barrier to entry for creating and deploying these tools that are built within their ecosystem. And certainly in the last few years, and Sam, you'll know a lot about this, extensive resources have been thrown into ease of use, both for consumers, staff and service users in our case, and customers, that's developers and business managers and leaders. Now, look, you don't exactly need to know programming languages, but it does help if you follow the same basic good practices when you're building this stuff. Now, I'm not a developer by any stretch of the imagination. I neither hold relevant qualifications, nor do I know any programming languages. Having said that, if you're going to go forward with this sort of stuff, Power Platform does use FX, OData, that kind of thing, simplified but still programming. So core knowledge is very useful. So research at least the behaviors of these things before you get started. My recommendation is Python. Excuse me. When you're looking at scaling up or down in your progress as a business, it is fairly easy to do. You can control the spending pretty well, and obviously the licenses are fairly standardized. But from the outset, think about what you're going to need down the line. So you can get monthly, you can get annual subscriptions. Don't go for the annual one if you don't need it, despite the potential for cost saving, because there does come a point when you've started paying for monthly ones. Yes, there is a tipping point where you say, well, the annual one might be a bit more worth it. But if you don't absolutely need to commit to it, then for heaven's sakes, don't, because you regret having spent it afterwards. Do excuse me. Why is that not looking for? There we go. Right. So just as an example, right. So this is data taken from their website. You can see there the business basic license starts, and this is ex-VAT, $4.90 a month. And to be honest, this is what the majority of our users are on right now, because it gives you access to much of the Power Platform, at least as an end user level. Developers, slightly more premium stuff involved, but it's not too horrendous in terms of cost. Now, just going back to an issue with when you're starting programming, form and function are both very, very key considerations when you're designing these tools. Again, both for developer and end user, a lot of resources have gone into making this easy, but still it is important to think, how is it going to look when it gets used, and what performance considerations you're going to want to think about. So establish design rules for your apps that are going to match or come close to your existing corporate design language. So if you've got documentation out there that's letterheaded or designed a certain way, think about that sort of thing. And for God's sakes, if you're going to go and do this, work with test and tummy data before you go for live deployment. Again, humble pie here. I didn't do this on one occasion, and let's just say it's a good thing I had a backup, because that's 19 hours I'm not going to get back again. But there we are. Excuse me. Right. The other great thing about Microsoft is third-party application support. There's a whole range of APIs out there that these apps will connect up to. So Adobe comes to mind as an obvious one for e-signatures, for contracts, that kind of thing. I know in the payroll space, Xero, QuickBooks, that sort of thing, they have connections there. Annoyingly, the one we use, which is Sage, doesn't. Don't quite know why they've not joined that bandwagon yet, but they don't seem to have wanted to play. Be aware, though, of potential cost implications when you're using some of these services. What 3 words? This one stumped me quite recently. The app itself is free for end users, but the API requires a subscription. So just be careful not to be caught out by that one. Right, so business development opportunities abound with this sort of thing. Now, some of the existing software providers, those of you who are out there in the domiciliary field will know the likes of Access come to mind, or Birdie. They're the usual suspects. They're turnkey solutions, and they're designed to accommodate a massive range of potential clients, but that therefore leaves very little room for customization. So if you want to perhaps alter something in a slight way to suit your business or your operations, it's not often very easily done. There are smaller providers out there who will be a bit more organic, maybe let you have access to their development teams. But to be honest, there are fewer and fewer out there now in terms of the space in the market. The other thing is that some of these groups, the performance can start to suffer if you're working with high volumes of data and or processing. Well, guess what? So are the rest of the clients, and at particular points of the day, it can suffer quite badly. In our case, our prime mover, as we call it, in our operations, which is our capacity management system, could not be integrated to our incumbent provider at all. So we came up with a workaround, and I'll show you that a bit later on. But the caveat there was that because we had 2 different sets of software going at once, there was this translation that involved a lot of human admin time between the 2 systems to keep them both in check. But that's not to say that it isn't impossible. If you've got something that you can see that you need to be built, for heaven's sakes, just build it and then put up with, I would argue, the translation afterwards. The other thing, of course, is bespoke reporting and data. Now, every business has its key metrics and information on which decisions are made in both the short and the long term. And again, some of these providers, they do offer limited reporting suites, not very customizable in many cases. And those that do, one of the key things that's missing is scheduled reporting. So your daily, your weekly, fortnightly, monthly, whatever frequencies you want to work at, they don't offer that as a standard feature in many cases. It's often a premium feature. Right, and then finally, centralizing processes and operations under one strategy. Now, given enough time and resources, there's no reason why it isn't possible for you to build things that manage your clients and the staff progression from beginning to end. And in our case, we've just started doing that with our service users. So we've got rostering underway at the moment, care planning's on the cards, EMAR eventually, if we can make it work. But on the staff side, you've got everything from recruitment to sickness, holidays, training, even payroll. So there are plenty of opportunities there for that sort of thing. Obviously, that's very highly advanced. We've had a lot of time to work with it. But as I say, given enough time and resources, no reason why you can't do that. Right, got to talk about the learning curve. Again, plenty of doses of humble pie here. But in my case, in our company's case, we started off with Excel. And anybody that knows macros or VBA, or God help you, but you'll know that it's very difficult to scale that sort of thing up very quickly because Excel just eventually falls over. So that then necessitated, as I said at the beginning, going on to SharePoint to then allow for the easier transition of data, and that became so very powerful for us and for our basic operations. We then had a look at Power Automate, and this was an interesting learning curve because we tried to do the rostering in Power Automate. Let's just say it wasn't very successful for very long, but it taught us a lot. So a lot of our basic operations are in there now. So a lot of staff resources, requesting holidays comes to mind. That's a key one that we've built in there. And that's partly tying in to what we then went on to, which was Power Apps, which has enabled us to achieve a whole new level of flexibility and possibility within our systems. And I must be honest, You can do the progression the same way we have, but if you're looking at this from a standpoint of building your own stuff from scratch, I would advise going straight through to Power Apps and Power Platform generally, because, as I said, the level of flexibility that it offers is just that much greater. As I said, Excel falls over very quickly. SharePoint does have its uses. It's quite interactive, and I'll explore that a lot more detail a bit later, but there are some points at which you just have to say, well, no, I need this next step up, but don't be afraid to take that step. 5 words I absolutely live by: learn, plan, experiment, fail, and succeed. There is no substitute anywhere for experience and experimentation. As I said, don't be afraid to try out the new tools, even if they appear a little bit intimidating at first. But to start with, write your tools to solve your own problems first, your own workflows, before you try and tackle some wider scale concern that you can probably see on the horizon out there in the distance that needs solving. But there's no point trying that if you're not comfortable with what you're working with first. So as a bit of a starting guide here, there's a chap called Matthew Devaney. He's an American ex-Microsoft employee. He's now got his own website. As you can see there's a QR code to get easy access to it. All sorts of fantastic tools on there for you to get started, mainly focused on the Power Platform. It's a thing he calls the Power Apps Cookbook on there. It's a bit of a quick start guide as to how to get started with some of these things. Yes, there is the Microsoft documentation, but these guys have been through it and done it all. So that's where I got started, and it saved me a lot of hours of reading, quite frankly. The other chap is Shane Young at Power Apps 911, again, American, but they both understand these systems inside and out. So if you're looking for a nice user-friendly way to get started, I'd recommend going to those two. Right, so as I said, the care sector is one that is still quite analog in nature. Paper documents do still have their place, particularly if you're working in a rural area. Your mobile data reception is not always going to be the best. And if particularly you're working in a care home, you go any distance into the building, forget 4G, it's not going to exist. Now, except in the case of fire or flood, those documents are always going to be there for immediate access by whoever is interested in seeing them, be it the service user, the family, the health professional, whoever it might be who needs to see them. They're there for you at any given point. Now, look, set realistic expectations if you're going to go down this route. Your staff and your customers are not always going to welcome change. That's the big thing, isn't it? Trying to get to the point at which you say, right, we're bringing in this new system. It can do X, Y, Z for us. Your managers will probably jump all over it. Your staff will be going, I'm not so sure this is a good idea, because they're very used to a certain way of doing things. Now, this is a particular concern if you've got staff who are less familiar with technology from the outset and or find writing easier than they would typing. You must remember to accommodate these things and ease the transition. Now, there would be nothing worse, nothing at all, than a member of your staff using a tool, it breaking, and they're then being overcautious forevermore the next time you try to bring in a new thing. So my recommendation would be to deploy your apps in a small and controlled setting as possible before you go for mass deployment, partly to iron out bugs, partly for checking on design, but also just to see if it works. You know, that basic consideration, does it actually work for what we're trying to make it do? So as I say, start small, and if you can, go with a team where you've got a majority of people who know their way around the technology and who can give you, well, quite frankly, constructive feedback other than it works or it doesn't work, because as a developer, that's the sort of thing you really come to rely on. I am going to say, though, technology is not a silver bullet to solve all your problems, but it can shine a light on areas for improvement. So in our case, there's a particular process we went through, which is a daily handover. Excuse me. And this, in our case, used to be done on paper in books, which we wouldn't get back for several days at a time. So we had less than ideal visibility on whether things that were recorded there were being responded to in a timely fashion. We took the jump, we made that digital, and as a result, we now have very, very rapid response, good visibility, and we can do a good degree of reporting on that. And I'll demonstrate that for you at the end of the session here. So Let's now go on to a fun topic, which is maintenance and continuous improvement. Now, you might read that and go, what do you mean they'll never be done? What I mean by that is that don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Never be afraid to deploy a stable but imperfect app. Again, let your end users have a go with it. Let their feedback guide your development. In other words, you want to try and get to a point where you can rapidly improve things incrementally, but don't wait for it to be absolutely tip-top perfect before you deploy it. Obviously, meet compliance and governance and regulations, but beyond that point, there is a very real danger that you're going to try and spend 80% of your time solving that last 20% of the problems. Having said that, do try and plan your designs and your key functions for each tool or app on paper before hitting the keyboard. Consider whether the app's going to be on mobile devices, tablets or PCs, and or a combination of the two. And also consult the prospective users of the apps. So find out if they have any accessibility requirements, or if, let's say, you're working with your service users more than your staff, they may have poorer eyesight and or dexterity. So larger icons, night mode, that kind of thing. Very, very key considerations for making these apps as accessible as possible. I will say one thing on this point, which is that when you're working with your customers, there is a danger that you can take too much feedback from them and ultimately try and integrate too many things into one app. So again, try and keep it incremental. And if you get enough of the same feedback from different areas or different groups of people, yeah, do you know what? Maybe it's time to bring that into the app. It's a very, very careful balance. Now, on the other side of things, automation processes are rarely going to change once you've got an established method. So reports, again, are something that in a regulated industry, we have to rely on, that they're going to stay static in terms of how they are generated, how the data is presented, and ultimately how it can be viewed and accessed, particularly as Sam was mentioning, in an inspection setting where it's got to be seen like that. And you haven't got any time to worry about how it might look or how it's been produced. Nope, you've got to have that process right there at the touch of a button. So again, draw these things out on flowcharts for each process, and again, consult with your key end users as to how that data is going to be collated, formatted, displayed. If you need to worry about this at this point, I'm hoping you won't, but you might already. Scaling is something that becomes a bit of a problem here. So you do have the premium licenses in Power Automate and indeed Power Apps to deal with larger headroom in terms of data automation and flowcharts. But if you're dealing with that level of scale, consider multiples of the process triggered by different actions. And what I mean by that is, let's say, for example, you've got reporting on, say, falls or for so other incidents involving service users. You won't categorize those down if you've got enough of them coming through at any given point. For each process, you only want to report on that metric, and they'll all end up in the same database anyway. So that, again, that avoids you hitting these limits for data throughputs and that kind of thing. And also, if budget allows, create several technical user accounts. So we have one, we call it the walnut tree. And again, that allows you to avoid throttling limits. So you have a license that is tied to certain amounts of data handling per 24 hours, per 30 days, things like that. And again, you'll only have to really worry about this if you get to this level of scale. But if you do, consider having multiple accounts that can deal with different data sets so that you don't lose any time waiting for these things to be processed. Right. This is a fun topic, isn't it? Data and governance. Right. But it is very, very vital. Sharing and storing data, we've covered briefly. Thank you, Sam. You've done part of my job for me. As I say, build the engine before you build the car. Access to and interaction with data may need to be very, very granular. And the way I recommend doing this is build an app that will ultimately control the other apps in your deployed fleet. So segregate your data storage by category on your chosen platform, again, to avoid capacity limitations, but also to make sure that you are staying compliant with your regulatory bodies. I would also suggest you consider an archiving tool for any older data. So Microsoft does have a system for this. It's called Microsoft Blob. I don't remember what the pricing structure is on this, but I don't think it's too horrendous. But again, that ties in with Power Automate and indeed Power Apps, I believe, from memory as well. So the way that I tend to do this is I have SharePoint lists for data that is out in front on that day that you need people to see. You then have Power Apps and Dataverse, which is a SQL database, massive, great big thing, which will store the vast majority of that year's data, or maybe the past few years' data, and then Blob for anything before that. The other thing, of course, keep the data under your control. Emails in particular are a big old no-no, because once you email something sensitive out as an attachment, you've got no idea where it could end up. All it takes is for someone to hit the forward button and sayonara, it's gone God knows where. And that's partly what led to things like WannaCry a few years ago. That security wasn't there. So again, as Sam has said, there are ways you can control that and keep the data within your organization. But if you're doing things through Power Apps, a lot of that can stay inside Dataverse, and you as the developer have sole control of that if that is how you wish to do it. Right, in terms of data handling, you have SharePoint and Dataverse, and it's something that is quite technical. I'll try and keep this as top level as I can. SharePoint is generally easier for beginners to understand. And frankly, it is significantly cheaper, because to even get access to Dataverse, you're going to be paying out a premium for the higher end licenses. Saying that, it doesn't scale well, because it can only really handle about 100,000 records before it starts to go, hang on a minute, you're asking too much of me here. Whereas Dataverse, as I said, it's based on SQL, so it can very happily go into the millions. SharePoint lists are, however, very visual and interactive, and there's a whole wide variety in terms of the data types you can get on them. So each column will hold a certain data type, e.g. plain text, number, choice, they're very useful, calculation, lookup, image, file, and many, many more. But again, they don't tend to work well if you're trying to convert stuff that you're used to being on Excel. That won't work in SharePoint, because the great thing that it's lacking is that you can't click into a proverbial cell on a SharePoint list and expect it to have a formula behind it. That's not how it works. It is designed for presentation, not for processing of data. Now, oh dear me, my clicker's not working at all here. Retention policy and automation are something that you do have to consider from a very, very early point. Again, we've talked about Microsoft Blob, and they do in fact offer an entire product called Compliance that is precisely for the purpose of data management. But it's not a replacement for your own policies and procedures, not by any means. So Power Automate plays well here when you're looking at data deletion as an example. So there are certain things, if I'm right, it's between 6 and 8 years from the point at which you no longer need access to that data, at which point it should be safely deleted for compliance reasons. And at that point, you can say to Power Automate, right, okay, on this date in X number of years' time, when this gets added, trigger a deletion. And it will do that for you very, very happily. And again, that's about standardization of processes. On the flip side of that, make the data easily exportable if you can, and manageable enough, again, for that random access by CQC inspectors or assessors. The key thing with this is, and again, this is getting a bit technical, I'm going to try and avoid this too much, is there's a system called JSON, JSON, which is the vast majority of which the data is processed through Power Apps and indeed Power Automate. And essentially what that does is allow you to get it out into a CSV, which you can then do all sorts of analytics on, if that's the way that you want to go for. Right, so there's not much else to say on that end of things. So I'm going to just give you a quick demonstration of, as I said, what's possible and indeed what we have done in that time since we started doing this. Now, excuse me, most of this will be on Power Apps, so don't be too daunted by that. But as an example, we only got started with Power Apps really in about January of this year, so it's only 8 months, and we have 15 apps on the books right now. So huge amount of work's gone into it, but it's very easy to develop this stuff. Well, given time. But here we go then. So here's the first one. So this is our handover app. I alluded to this earlier on. This is the mobile version. So it's a simple form entry system. And you can see there we have the round, we have the carer, the date of the handover, and the service user in question. Now the handover in our case is a structured questionnaire. So there are 5 questions in this thing. And you can see there you go next, 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 whatever. And you would find those questions flashing up. And that red bordered square down there, that is to record your responses. So every time you press the button down below, you then keep a record of those, and then when you're ready, you'll submit it, and then your team leader, your coordinator, whoever, then has a record of those, and they can follow up as necessary. And the reason we built this is sort of a touch point, a daily touch point for our carers. It was a sort of a thing during COVID we thought was really, really vital, and it's carried on since, and it has absolutely worked dividends for us in the intervening time, because we have that daily connection with them all. They feel valued. They feel that they're able to give positive feedback that's listened to, and if necessary, can raise concerns as well. So that's handover, and then this is the dashboard that the handover app filters into. I can't show any data for obvious reasons, but what you would have down the left-hand side there is you would have the categories of data, so unwell or improved, happy or unhappy. You can read that in your own time. But on the right there, it's grouped by round and date of response. Because we're on the technical one here, there isn't one there, but you imagine the grouping for that week. It will go down by round, by round, by round. And then below that, you have a schedule of people whose responsibility it is for that area to take handover for that given area. Right then, next, this one is what I refer to as my pièce de résistance for obvious reasons. This is our visit management system, which will eventually form the backbone of our own rostering system. And I've gone way out on a limb doing this because I know the regulatory challenges involved. I'm not quite at the point where I'm even remotely floating at the idea of getting onto the assured supplier list. But having seen people go through that pain, it's interesting learning for somebody that wants to go and do this in your own time in terms of the hurdles they've had to jump, and again, some of the pain that can be avoided. So down the left here, again, you've got simple filtering. I can only show you the test data, which is a real shame, but you've got care plans up the top there, and that's on a horizontal gallery, as it's called. So you have data sets that are copied again and again and again for each line of the entry in a database. And you can see there where we've got new plan, you can make a simple entry there based on those requirements. And then below that, for each care plan, the visits themselves. So in this case, we've got a weekly view here. We've got Monday through Friday. You can see the duration, the shift it's on, the rounds, meds level, visit frequency, gender preference if there is one, training requirements if there are any. And then the key thing that people forget in these platforms is those temporary increases and decreases. So if you've got a surge in winter from your hospitals, they'll be saying, right, okay, we need to get these out for this amount of time, might be back in hospital, might be into respite, wherever. And that's something that the existing providers, apart from access, I believe, cannot handle. So that's something that we took into consideration very, very early on. And this is, again, attached to the visit management system. This is the round viewer. So this is a very pictorial way of doing it. If you can imagine this, we used to have a wall full of Lego that would do this. So that was interesting whenever we made changes to try and get this to work. We had to constantly go in there and think, right, okay, is it 5 minutes? Is it 10? Whatever the increment was. This, however, does it on a very visual basis, grouped by day of the week, and rounds for a given area on the right there of your screen. And all you need to do is to hover over something and you can get a lot more detailed information about that visit. So again, as I was showing you on the previous screen, all the items in yellow there, hover over that and you've got that on that screen there. And then finally, our capacity management system. So again, I've had to block out all the names. So I do apologize for all these black splodges all over the screen. But essentially what you would have there is names of staff who are currently assigned to those rounds. And you can make changes on this very easily. You press that button at the top there, down come a load of drop-down lists under each name for each round, and all you have to do is change the people that you want to change, press transmit, bang, done. And that, again, is a sort of quality of life thing that we would really love to see these existing providers come up with, but for some reason, they're just not so keen on the idea. So we came up with this workaround about 3 years ago in its first incarnation. And again, that was on Excel. So you can see what I meant by macros, all these different color codings. It's, it got complicated very quickly. And it turned out Power Apps had this much easier way of doing it. If only I'd thought, maybe give it a try. So I am slightly kicking myself about having not gone and tried it, but there we are. So again, these are one of our centerpieces that we use on a very, very regular basis. And a lot of people have access to. So again, the possibility for development, for scale, for using these things is not quite limitless, but not far off, especially for this sort of process where you can really realize the benefits for your systems. Now, slightly different view for the same system here. This is our staff availability matrix. Again, fairly obvious. You can keep track of people on holiday, training, other absence, or even if they've left. And again, you can see there you've got in white available and then black on no shift. And you can make changes the same way. Tap the button over there and down come the drop downs. Right, so that's pretty much it. I'm ready now to turn over to some questions and answers. If anybody's got some questions that they're just burning to ask me, do let me know.
Great. Thank you, Peter. That was amazing. Really good to sort of see the practical ways in which you're using these tools. Actually, sort of something that struck me is we had quite a few people asking questions about how long it takes to set up. So maybe coming back to you first. So do you do this full time? Is this just one aspect of your job? You mentioned it's been about the last 8 months. So sort of how much time do you think it takes roughly to sort of set up one app like this?
Right. Okay. So it partly comes down to your understanding of the functions within the framework that you're building. So if you know exactly what it is that you want to do, you've scoped it out, you've planned it all out, that could take anywhere from a week to a month, depending on the complexity of the scale. In terms of building the app itself, the front end functions don't take long at all. The back end, on the other hand, connecting it up to all the data sets, the APIs, the connections, that is what takes the time. It's quite laborious, quite rigorous. As an example with the CMS there, the initial app took me 5 or 6 weeks or so to get most of those functions right. And I'd say another 3 weeks worth or so of continuous development time since.
Brilliant. Thank you. That is just really helpful, just so for anybody who's sort of got the bug to go and start creating all their own apps, I think it's helpful to be realistic about timescales. And then maybe Sam, to come to you then. So there's a question as well we have around what is the lead time to set up sort of a Microsoft 365 business package for a small business with staffing of under 50, in your experience, sort of supporting small businesses? Oh, you're on mute. Sorry, Sam.
Sure. There you go. Can you hear me? Hopefully that's better.
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, it depends on where you're currently at in terms of deployment from like base zero. We do have like pre-configured security deployments that can get you. It can get you to where you want to be very quickly within a matter of kind of days. So yeah, it all just depends on how much of maybe a mess your environment is and how much needs to be fixed. But yeah, it can be very, very quick.
Well, yeah, presumably it's easier starting from scratch than having to retroactively go back in and sort it all out.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, and then maybe one for both of you as well. So we had a question around sort of how much training do you think it'd be useful for staff or for yourself to complete to feel sort of comfortable with using Automate Power BI, sort of thing?
Sam, do you want to go first?
Oh, I mean, after you, Peter, you're the whiz. You're the power whiz.
Right. Okay. So in terms of the end users, so the Power Apps should ideally be as easy to use as something you might find on your phone in daily life generally. If you're building these things from scratch, yes, there are some accredited courses out there that you can do. I've done a couple for Power Apps now. But again, really, it's about having the curiosity, I think, to read around the subject, to have a look at all the documentation that's out there. Because as I say, no amount of training can prepare you for the experience that is unique to you, your business, your customers.
Right, thank you. Sam, anything to add to that one?
No, to be honest, Peter, I mean, that's, yeah, spot on.
Right, just for people on the call, so in the past, Microsoft have offered social care providers free training, in-person half-day training on Power BI. I did just shoot off an email to my contacts there during this webinar to sort of find out if that's something they will be offering again in the future. Haven't heard back yet, but I will contact everybody after this if I have heard about any free training courses which are available for Power Apps. And as ever, if we do find out about any free training courses which are being offered to the social care sector, we will put these into our newsletter as well. So we'll try and see if that's something Microsoft are willing to do again for anybody.
Just to say on that, oh, sorry, Katie.
No, you carry on, Peter.
Just to say on that point, there are in fact some webinars and things that Microsoft run for free anyway, just for end users. I think you do have to have at least a basic level of license to get into them, but yeah, they are free at the point of use at that point.
Exactly. And they also, for any of you who are also using NHS mail accounts, quite often you can access the NHS training, which they offer for free as well. So I will try and find all of those links, speak to Peter about getting the links to the business license and training as well. And we'll add that to the email we'll send to you all with slides at the end of it. And talking of things we can send out to you afterwards, Sam, you mentioned that you've managed to find a price list. Was that right?
Yes, yeah, I did. I managed to have a quick look. So, yeah, so I'll quickly break down for so for charities, business premium license £5.20. We've got Power BI after the 10 free ones you get, it's £2.50. And then for the Power Apps after the 10 free ones you get, it's £2.10. And then for non-charities, Power BI is £6.75. And Power Apps is also £6.75. And Copilot, we are offering it at £18. So yeah, those are kind of, unfortunately, like I said, yeah, Copilot for whatever reason, not a charity discount. We're working on it, guys. But yeah.
Yeah, so that's totally fine. Thank you, Sam. That's really, really helpful. And just as a reminder for everybody, those are prices per month.
Yes.
We've had some questions as well. Does Copilot offer a free trial period? And then Lizzie said that there is a web version of Copilot which is free and works the chat box, so it's very restricted compared to the licensed version, which can attach into the apps. But she does recommend it, even the free web-based version.
Just to come in on that, if I may, there's a couple of tips and tricks that we've found our way around. So, for example, if you're working on Power Apps, my recommendation would be to get started using Teams, which allows you access to Dataverse. It is a bit constrained in terms of the functionality. Again, scale could be a problem. But if you're not ready to invest the £20 per month or whatever it is for a Power Apps premium license, then obviously that is a potential avenue to go down. The other thing I would say is that if you're looking at deployment on a large scale for your employees, if you've got enough apps out there that it becomes economical to have them all under one license, so Business Basic is the lowest ranked one you can get access to Power Apps from as an end user, then go for that one. If, however, it's just one, get a per app license because it's cheaper. The other thing is to say on that point, if you're looking at trials, I think someone mentioned about Copilot trial. There are a couple of things out there that will allow you to run free trials, but again, they'll only let you do so many requests per, I think it's per month, I can't remember. But Copilot, because it's an open AI thing that they've bolted on, basically, I imagine there's some sort of an agreement there in their contracts with them that's preventing them from making that any cheaper. That will probably change as the technology matures and they take it more in-house, but because it was only signed, what, April was it? They announced it. I imagine that that's something that's on the horizon. But yeah, it is something to consider if you need as high a level of license. Chances are you probably won't.
Brilliant. Thanks, Peter. And I'm going to take that opportunity actually to plug something I already did put in the chat, which is we're currently doing some work with the Institute of Ethics in AI at Oxford University, looking at responsible use of AI in social care. If anybody is thinking of testing out any generative AI, large language models, or is already using it and would like to find out more about the work we're doing, it's a big collaborative piece. Information is on our website. We have a couple more questions for you guys before we can let you both go. So quick one then is, how many people can use one license?
Which license do we speak of?
I think just the sort of general basis. So it's one license. Is that the same as like
one
license,
username? One license per user is how is the rule of thumb. Yes.
And then from Peter, from your perspective, then you would say that not all users need the same license necessarily. Some of them may have one with more premium features, and some may just have a basic.
Yes, absolutely. So most of your frontline staff will be content on either an F1 or an F3 license. The F in this case denotes frontline. So that gets you at a basic level access to an email inbox, Teams and SharePoint at an F1. I forget what the additional is for F3. I think it's just a couple of extra features. But if you're talking about your admin people, they're going to need at least a business standard, which get to the desktop class Office products. Business Basic is doable if they're content using the web versions, but again, use case dependent. You won't generally tend to need many business standard licenses. I reserve them for your top flight management, and you'll only ever need one business premium or E5 equivalent license for your compliance. Technical accounts is a different matter. They do not need a conventional license of any kind, not the F1, not the business basic, not the E licenses, nothing of that type. They will just happily run along on the premium license for Power Automate, Power Apps, whichever it is. You don't have to have a prerequisite of an existing frontline license first. Having said that, if you want to use them for emails, then you will have to get, say, an Exchange Online license. So that's a dedicated email inbox. So stage 1 is 1 terabyte, stage 2 is 2 terabyte, if I've got that right, I think. But again, they've all got their own unique price points. One thing I didn't cover actually in this, if you're looking at deployment of this sort of thing, if you've got computers out there that are sort of domain connected or whatever, if you've got a server sitting somewhere, consider that the virtualization stuff they do. So you can tie that into Entra, to SharePoint, all these things. Again, this is very, very technical stuff. Get your IT guys on this, guys. But what you'll be able to do, if you're used to a local domain controller, there's no trouble now. They've really gone to town with this. On getting these things virtualized. So if you want to log into your pre-existing domains or whatever, you can do that from wherever. You can do that from remote as well as in office these days.
Thanks, Peter. I have to say I think I'm fairly technical, but that was some of it a little bit above my head. But hopefully for the technical people on the call, that was useful. And for everybody else, these are the questions to go talk to your IT team, if you have one in-house, or to your managed service provider, to your IT provider who sort of helps with this support. So got another few questions, I think, specifically on apps here. So had a question, I think from another Sam, asking whether there are sort of template pre-built apps that you can use as sort of a starting point to jump off from, or is it always starting from scratch? Maybe Sam, if you wanted to go first on this, or Peter, I don't know who you prefer.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Peter can add more than myself, but yes, there are template ones that you can build on and improve. And yeah, I mean, there's a whole actual app store that you can actually have a look at. But I'm sure, I mean, Peter, sorry, this is a question for you actually. Were all of yours started from scratch actually, or did you use some templates?
Okay, so in terms of templates, yes, layouts, we did a lot of templates. There are certain ones that kind of come pre-baked. There's a very useful calendar one in there, which we use for our holiday scheduling and training for that matter as well. Because to be honest, I couldn't be bothered how to make a 31-day grid work. I can't put it any more mildly than that. But yes, there are very useful templates out there that will do some of the basic functions for you. But the second you want to start moving into more customized data sets, that kind of thing, yeah, they do tend to get a bit difficult to work with. Not to say that once you've started with a template, it's therefore set in stone. You can obviously customize from within the app. But yeah, if what you're after is a quick and easy thing like, say, forms, that comes to mind. That handover app that was done on a form template. Yeah, there are plenty of them out there. And it's just a case of exploring and see what works.
Yeah, great, thank you both. And I guess a follow-up one from that as well, from Oscar, who has asked if by any chance you have a template for an app that checks in social workers whilst on visits.
Ooh, great question. I will check. I will get back to you with that, and I will speak to some consultants who are the specialists in Power BI, but in Power Apps even, but potentially yes. But I can't guarantee it. I can't say anything now in full confidence.
Is this person asking from a standpoint of ECM, of electronic call monitoring or something, or?
I don't have the context, but I assume they have a lot of social workers who are visiting and they need a log of visitors on sites from that specific profession.
Right,
so,
right, yeah.
I mean, maybe I could suggest, I mean, if you want to answer now, that's fine, or maybe suggest that Oscar gets in touch with the both of you as well, whichever's easiest.
Well, I'm just thinking because obviously, Sam, you mentioned in yours, if you're thinking about, say, something as simple as entry control or registration, that's a very simple thing to do. If, however, you're talking about per service user visitations, that's something that you're getting into the realm of very high-end rostering, which is doable inside Power Apps. If you want to go down this route, QR codes work inside there, as do NFC chip type things. They work as well. Not exactly natively, but barcodes as well. So it depends on the context, of course, but if you're working on something that is that sophisticated, then yeah, it's not quite something you can very easily template. But entry control, yeah, that's dead easy.
Well, thanks both, very helpful. So I think coming on to the last question now, which actually maybe one which is more for me to answer, but I thought I would just throw it across in case either of you are aware of things that I don't know on this. So we have a question about whether there is any funding or assisted funding to access handsets, iPads, tablets, or anything like that, which you are aware of. Fine if not. I know this isn't a funding webinar. I do have some resources to link to, but just from a Microsoft specific way.
That's a really good question. I have a colleague who works very closely with Microsoft's TSI team, their Tech for Social Impact team, which is the charitable branch. Again, I'm so sorry I can't actually answer that right now, but
No,
that is a question
fine.
that I can respond.
Ones we talked about beforehand.
There are resources through Microsoft partners that don't directly answer this question, but for example, if you're interested in if you're interested in Copilot, I can help basically go and get yourself a Copilot readiness assessment. So that's like for those who are interested in that, it basically scans your environment, builds a report on what you're doing now, and then gets you ready to use Copilot. The same goes with security, but for that specifically, I'm not entirely sure. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. But anything you find out, we appreciate it. And then just sort of from my side, so Christopher, it's a question that we get very frequently actually is how do we get access to hardware to use all of this technology on? It can be incredibly expensive. I'm going to pop a link into the chat to our pages where we list all of the funding opportunities we're aware of. I will say that at the moment, I'm not aware of anything specifically for iPads, laptops, tablets, hardware. Generally speaking, if you are sort of a small business, we recommend speaking to any local digital charities. There's nearly always one which is linked to the local authority who will quite often will restore old computers. You can get them at incredibly discounted rates or often free, but that's done sort of like on local charity basis, what exactly they'd like to do. If it's somebody with a personal budget, which they're managing themselves and can purchase their own technology, there's sometimes options through access to work schemes as well to get some of your technology funded, particularly anything which can help with work. But yeah, it's a great question, and it's one we are always looking for more resources on. So if anybody in the chat is aware of anything, please do also pop that into the chat so we can send that to everybody else so they know that there's funding available for these things. So I think that is all of the questions from us today. I want to give a massive thanks to Sam and Peter for letting me learn so much today. I'm embarrassed to say I actually didn't know what the BI and Power BI stood for before this session. So that's every day's a learning day. Just one quick last reminder slides from me then. If there's anybody on the call who is interested in digital care records, specifically digital social care records, and wants to move from paper onto a digital system, there is still funding available for that. Please make sure to visit the Digitising Social Care website to find out more about that funding. And I think that is us from us. So all that's left to say is a massive thank you to our speakers. Huge thank you to everybody who's attended today. Please do get in touch with us at any of these contact links if you have any further questions, and we will send an email out in the next sort of 24 hours or so with links to resources, slides, and the recording from this session. But thanks very much from us, and see you all soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks all.